Travellers will once again drop by today after Qatar Airways suddenly abandoned planes to end Omicron-driven travel bans on South Africa. It's still not clear what brought about the sudden change of heart, but let's speak to independent tourism expert Gillian Saunders around the whole travel ban situation. Thank you so much for your time, Gillian. I actually can't believe that we're still having this discussion 2 weeks after Omicron was identified, and how the World Health Organization has said this variant is in over 60 countries and only in 10 African countries, yet we are still being treated in a way where South Africans can't travel and aren't accepted into certain countries.
It's utterly horrific, Heidi. I don't even know what to say. And well, good evening, and thank you for having me. It's so blatantly discriminatory that we're all shocked, and we still remain shocked when everybody else is saying, well, the World Health Organization is saying closure of borders don't work. Our own scientists and many other scientists are saying border closures don't work. And that is borne out by the fact that Omicron is now in so many countries and multiplying very fast in countries like the UK. Yet we are still, and a selection of other African countries, the only ones with these incredibly strict border restrictions or total bans on people going into the countries who've been in South Africa, for instance. So it's very iniquitous. It's very challenging for the tourism industry, and it's been a very challenging 2 weeks. And at the moment, unfortunately, while there are some sort of glimmers of hope on the horizon, it doesn't look like anything is going to change shortly.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite unfortunate. But just speak to us about, for example, airlines. I know that Emirates is not flying. It's flying into South Africa, but you can't fly out to the UAE or other connecting countries with Emirates. We know Qatar has said that due to operational reasons. But this all lies in whether or not certain countries and the governments there allow South Africans in. So it's not necessarily the airlines that are banning us, it's more of the countries and their governments that have imposed these restrictions.
It certainly is, and what we understand about Qatar Airlines is that they had made a decision to fly, and at that stage the Qatar authorities were saying that was fine, you can fly, and then pressure, we believe, was brought to bear on the Qatar authorities from other countries that were still having restrictions against South Africa. And they were saying, you know, we believe that, anyhow, was the reason for them pulling it. And it was the Qatar government who did that, not Qatar Airlines. But you can imagine the absolute confusion this causes. Airlines are putting flights on, taking flights off. They can fly, they can't fly. So since the absolute ban, for a few days, pretty much everybody was banned from flying to and from South Africa. We can now, for instance, flights are going to the UK. But South Africans can't go to the UK, and anybody else who goes to the UK who's entitled to go there, so that might be a citizen of the European country or a citizen of the UK, they have to go into this absolutely horrific hotel quarantine for 14 days. And it's very, very expensive. So that's a huge deterrent for most people. And of course, South Africans can't go. Some of the other countries are allowing their own nationals back in, but they're requiring self-isolation, they're requiring additional testing. And they're not letting South Africans in. Even the countries that are sort of saying, look, we're letting people in from South Africa, yes, but they're not letting South Africans in. So there's still a lot of discrimination. And what all of this does is it dents travellers' confidence. So people who are thinking of travelling, people who might have been thinking, well, I'll book to go to somewhere in Africa in February, or I'll book to go in January, is going to feel total lack of confidence to book, because of the disaster that has beset all of the travellers who've been stranded and stuck, had to cancel their holidays, had to go into hotel quarantine, got stuck in South Africa, got stuck in the UK. It's just a nightmare for the travel industry.
No, it totally is, because, I mean, you have a situation where people are completely stranded if they don't have a second passport to get into the EU. It becomes very frustrating. But I want to speak to you about Canada announcing it's abandoning the third country testing rule. It's a rule that rejected South African COVID-19 tests. What does this mean in terms of people wanting to move into Canada or get into Canada for work purposes, travel purposes, or just any purposes? What does this mean? Is this a good move?
Well, it's a good move. I mean, the fact is that putting in that ban and not accepting our PCR tests was a terrible move. And that was a great shock to all of us. Our own health authorities, our own scientists said, but hang on, we have some of the best PCR testing, some of the best scientific work in the world. You trusted us, or you believed us when we said we found the Omicron variant in all the sequencing and the identification of the variant, but hey, our PCR tests are not good enough. That was another travesty. Luckily, it seems to have been reversed within a few days. So now if you are traveling to Canada, you don't have to suddenly find your way where you transit in, I don't know, Holland or UK to get a COVID test when you're there. But again, still South Africans can't go into Canada. It's only Canadian nationals or other people who are allowed into Canada. And they still have to quarantine. They still have to take extra PCR tests.
I think the quarantine becomes very complicated because you also have to quarantine at your own cost. Gillian, speak to us about us moving into our peak travel season. The 16th of December is around the corner. Christmas is around the corner. But we can't really expect many to travel to South Africa because it's going to be very difficult for them to get out.
Well, unfortunately, that's what we're seeing. We've actually just done another snapshot survey of the industry, and compared to 2 weeks ago when we first asked them, the level of cancellations have gone up. On average, our respondents had 2.4 million rands worth of cancellations 2 weeks ago. That's now gone up to 5.2 million rands worth of cancellations. So the international tourism is slowly dropping off, and any new bookings they might have expected isn't happening. In fact, their data indicates that they'll be running in these next 4 months of the season on about 14% of normal levels from 2019. That's really a really low level. So the domestic tourism season is vital for some of our industry to survive through the next 2-3 weeks. And it's a very important high season for the industry. And there are, we believe, a number of people who were South Africans who are going to travel internationally who will now be traveling locally as well. So this is important that people do travel. The industry has fantastic protocols. All our transport and airlines have got fantastic protocols so that you can, in fact, travel safely around the country. And that it's, a lot of people stay in small establishments, in self-catering establishments, in second homes, where there is very little risk of COVID transmission. So we welcome a strong domestic holiday season. We as the industry would like to say we've been having domestic tourism since about July, August last year when we were opened up for domestic travel. The industry has operated safely since then. There hasn't been any major spreader events in the tourism or in the domestic tourism industry. So it's something that we hope South Africans are still going to do. They're going to travel. They're going to enjoy their Christmas away from home.
The NCCC, the National Coronavirus Command Council, is meeting possibly next week, Tuesday. The health minister telling us earlier on this evening that perhaps we might have a Christmas that doesn't have lockdown restrictions. What are you expecting for the announcement to be, and how devastating would it be, for example, if our beaches are closed again, something we saw last December?
Well, there was 3 things that happened last December that were absolutely disastrous for the industry. The one was the beach closures, the other was the alcohol ban, and the other was the curfew. So those things combined to make it a very difficult season. And prior to that, earlier in the year, last year, we'd had the interprovincial travel ban, which was horrific for our tourism industry. And then this year in July, we also had the travel ban for people traveling in and out of Gauteng on leisure. Each time, those things have been very disastrous for our travel industry in terms of a domestic peak travel season. I think that our own government now has been very sensible. I think what Cyril spoke to us about 2 weeks ago was very sensible. I do believe there are some measures they might take. I think one of the ones that they possibly should take is reducing the size of indoor gatherings. Indoor gatherings are definitely where there is much more risk of spreading the variant, and the industry would support those being reduced over the period of let's call it the peak of this wave. I do believe that interprovincial bans will be ridiculous because we already know that this variant is in all the provinces and it won't change anything. And beach closures was, I think, an unfortunate mistake. People should be outdoors in the open air, in the parks and in the beaches, and there's absolutely no reason to close the beaches. What that does is it pushes people into shopping centres and other indoor venues, which is just anathema, where it's better that they're on beaches. But we believe that from the industry talking to people in health, people in tourism, that it's likely that we're not going to get anything other than perhaps an earlier curfew and hopefully maybe the rejection of the indoor gathering size, which I think would be a very sensible thing to do. And I think what's heartening is the early data that's coming out. One is that our rate of infections seems to be slowing, and in Gauteng potentially it's even turned, which is fantastic. And let's hope that's a continuing trend. And the other trend, of course, is that it looks like Omicron has a very low severity of disease, and our hospitalizations are not high. And of course, what we have a lockdown for is to take pressure off our hospitals. So as long as our hospital bed take-up with COVID patients remains at these lower levels, I don't think there's any reason to lock us down further, because the pressure isn't building up on hospitals.
Yeah, we'll just have to wait and see what the NCCC decides on, but hopefully it will not be too devastating, especially for the tourism sector and our economy. Thank you so much for your time. That's Gillian Saunders, who's an independent tourism expert, just speaking about the travel bans and how devastating it has been for the tourism sector here in South Africa.